This one is called I Don't Think That's an Angel by Jay Wilburn. The characters in this story have a particular career or industry they are part of, and I do my best to talk about that without actually explicitly saying what they're involved in. It's kind of a little challenge for myself, so we'll see how that works out. I Don't Think That's an Angel by Jay Wilburn. Bo Rockborough entered the funeral home thinking New Year's Day was the worst day for a funeral. Maybe Christmas or Thanksgiving would be worse, but no one would schedule funerals on those days. Yet, here he was, hung over as he imagined everyone else would be too, even if they hadn't laid it on quite as thick as he had the night and year before. It was easier when he was younger, much younger than 60 years old, but he still required recovery time at any age. He squinted against the soft light inside as he mounted the short run of carpeted steps. These places had a smell, not really the smell of death, but a flowery odor that he couldn't help but to associate with death and funerals. He hadn't worn his sunglasses because he was always self-conscious about being a cliché. He wished he had them now as he tried to read the names on the slotted felt letterboard with the thin white plastic letters stuck in, identifying which bodies occupied which rooms. It looked like a few people had decided to mourn passings on the first day of the year. That had to be a bad omen. Terrible way to start the year. Terrible. Bo thought he was having a reading issue as he failed to find John Grief's name on the first two passes. Maybe it was the wrong place. He had checked multiple times before coming, but he could still be wrong. Maybe his mind was finally going. His father had claimed Bo barely had brains in his head to begin with. When he was young, Bo was now a few years older than his old man ever got. Another bad omen, perhaps. Then it clicked into place. They were using John's real name, Walter A. Herbert. That did not sound like the name of a brilliant and powerful actor turned director. Of course, on the other hand, maybe it did. Bo tried to remember what the A stood for, but came up blank. He memorized the suite number and started walking through the flowery stink of the place. Quiet crying drifted out of scantily attended viewings on both sides of the hall. This was a bad day for a funeral. Collages of old photos stood on easels next to narrow podiums with guest books to sign. Funeral souvenirs. Everything about funerals was weird, Bo thought. There were widescreen TVs mounted to the walls and turned on by other doors. Montages of photos rolled through on these with slow fade cuts between each digitized image. John's open double doors sported one of these. Some of the images were when he was young. Some of the images from when he was younger were quite blurry. In one, he sat in a shiny purple and green pimp suit, so tacky. Bo thought he saw himself in the shadowy end of the table in the background of that picture, clearly scanned from a real photo taken when people still used film. He remembered that meal at some restaurant. They were celebrating something at the time, but he couldn't recall what. If that was him, Bo was really out of focus. The next one was John with no shirt on next to women in revealing swimsuits on a boat in some lake or river. The hair on his chest was already going gray in that one, but the thick hair on his head was dyed dark. Bo debated whether that image was appropriate for this setting. He supposed there were much worse still images than that around. He wondered if John's assistant picked them out or if that job went to somebody else. Bo couldn't remember which of John's family was still alive and which ones still talked to him. Bo had a few grown kids of his own and a couple grandkids he barely saw on a few awkward occasions. They always seemed to side with his exes, but he thought maybe he should make more of an effort anyway, especially if he was going to start this year with a funeral. That was when the first flash of light hit him. For a split second, he thought it was something on the TV screen he approached, but whatever it was, it impacted the whole room. The pastel colors suddenly turned brilliant bright. He didn't swoon, and it didn't really hurt, but he held the wall in his head anyway. It was gone as quickly as it came. He chalked it up right away to heavy drinking and dehydration. He also considered that it would be quite a point of gossip around the sets in coming days if he were to drop dead of an aneurysm in the middle of John Grief's viewing. Things were going to change around this town and the industry with John gone. They might forget him soon, but things would change. Ignoring the TV and reaching the open doors, he saw it was a fine turnout. Most of them wore sunglasses, though. Bo regretted not bringing his. But a good turnout. Maybe he wouldn't be completely forgotten, not right away. There were enough people here to block his view of the coffin and the body for now. He was thankful for that small mercy. Bo scanned the faces, looking for familiar friends he had worked with in decades past. As he looked upon stranger after stranger, he started to realize that he wasn't positive the faces he sought were still alive. He was in a funeral home looking for ghosts. Most of the people he worked with in the 80s and 90s had not made it to 60 years old. He considered them lucky to a degree, except that a few of them had died hard and ugly. Some of it was disease, but drugs and alcohol usually together, along with self-destructive lives, accounting for most. Violent ends were all too common, too. God knew many of them had questionable taste with who they let into their lives over the years. He knew a few others had survived despite all odds, but none of them appeared to be here. Maybe it was the date. Probably it was not wanting to face their own mortality. He didn't like flipping through the mental album of past friends. So many of them died young and horribly. He almost couldn't watch his own films because in many scenes with people alive and full of passion on the screen, he found himself to be the last one left alive. It was morbid. All those young women were made up to look like angels, at least when the scenes started. John Grief had died on December 30th, one day before his 61st birthday. Some clogged heart thing from what Bo had heard, but he was afraid to ask. Bo probably needed to get his own cholesterol checked before he checked out too. He did recognize some of these folks. Most of them were new to the industry, even though Bo still did some work with the help of Little Blue Pills. He hadn't worked with most of these actors. Both the men and women were easily a third his age. Instead of blue pills, he took out a goodies powder and chewed it up to help him through this performance and to try to kill off his persistent headache. Oh, but there she was. He had kind of feared she might be here, but in the end, Bo had decided she didn't like John that much, and she would surely have better New Year's plans. But Kelly, his latest ex-wife, was in fact here with her fiancé, Carl Lessing. He was closer to her age, but Bo couldn't remember exactly, but estimated she had turned 42 this year. She was a spiritual cleanser now, with her own Patreon page, and Carl did something with cars, but didn't work at a dealership. Bo turned away and strolled back up the hall. He swallowed down on a bitter taste in his throat that was only partially due to the headache powders. He wasn't leaving. He didn't hate her or him quite that much. He just needed a little more time before he could take this all in. The second flash of light hit him then, almost in the same spot in the hall as the first, but now he faced the other way. Filtered sunlight instead of John Grief montage. Bo found a high-backed chair and sat down heavy. It creaked with his sudden weight, but held. He imagined bigger bodies than his had collapsed here, overcome by their sorrow in the past. As he opened his eyes, the overbright colors finished bleeding out of the world, and he got a few milliseconds view of a figure before it winked out of existence too. Hallucinations could be part of heavy drinking and dehydration too. He was sober at the moment, though, mostly, even if hungover. It was fast enough that he could dismiss the afterimage of a person as merely his stressed imagination. Any other explanation came with too many downsides, so he chose not to explore them. Bo? He looked up, expecting to have to be nice to Kelly, but it wasn't her voice and it wasn't her. Brandy Pound was half Kelly's age. Bo stood to hug and greet her. No, you don't have to get up for me. She accepted his hug anyway. Before he let go, he realized she was treating him like an old man for whom merely standing might be a real struggle. Of course, he was the same age as her boss who had just died. She probably saw him as ancient, even though they had talked about doing scenes together in the future. He was feeling ancient and decrepit. The image fading in On the widescreen TV behind her showed John Grief in a form-fitting but more appropriate silver suit with his arm around a man Bo thought he recognized as a local politician. This shot was closer to the present, so it had the crisp focus of a picture taken with a phone. Bo thought that photo couldn't be good PR for any politician, even if he was a Democrat. How are you holding up?" he asked. He was about to add her name, but didn't know whether to go with Brandy or Dawn. She had still been John's assistant, but had started performing over the last year. She was good, very good. "It's been tough. Do you know what you plan to do yet?" "Well, I'm going to still perform, and John's partners still want me to run things for them." Bo liked that because she seemed to like him. Hopefully, she didn't view him as completely geriatric. He could still use the work if she would have him. "Your own studio, that's great. I mean, not great he's gone, but you know what I mean." "Yeah, that's fine. I wouldn't own anything except my paycheck, which is enough for me now." "Well, there you go. My own site is doing well, so I can still do my live streams until we sort out all the mess." Bo had never done live work. He always needed the option for cuts and edits. Time to get the equipment in working order was always good too. The industry was passing him by if it hadn't already. He hadn't been completely stupid with his money over the years, but he hadn't been smart enough to be able to stop working some at least. What sort of mess?" She rolled her eyes. That made her seem very young, seem even younger to him, and made him feel like maybe he did need to sit down like the old man he was. He had really started to feel old in the 90s, but had kept going as best he could. Scenes had started to get more extreme, but nothing compared to what was out there today. He had never adjusted well to changes over the decade. Everyone shaving clean, including the men, was one change he still wasn't completely comfortable with, but he did what he had to do. He supposed it did make things look bigger. She said, "John wasn't great with the books. We're having trouble lining everything up. If we can't figure it out, we'll have to close the studio just to avoid going to jail." Bo's eyes went wide. Oh shit, was he skimming? He wasn't sure why that would matter if John owned the place, unless he had cheated the partners or dodged the IRS. He hoped John wouldn't do that, but who knew? "It looks more like negligence than anything like that," she said, "but we've got to figure it out if we're going forward." Let me know anything I can do," he said. After it came out of his mouth, he realized he probably had nothing to offer with those types of problems. It was just a thing people said in times like these. She hugged him again and said, "I'll let you know. Thank you for coming." As she walked away, he thought her response was just a thing people said too. The third flash of light was more intense than the previous two. Now there was no denying something was wrong. The light was so bright that it killed all other colors. Instead of illuminating everything around, the hall, the building, the world vanished in shadows created by that brilliant glow. Bo didn't want to look into that light, so it took him a few seconds to identify a figure in the middle of it. It was female, but her features were obscured to darkness by the same bright glow around her. She wore white jeans and a form-fitting tee that showed midriff. It was the sort of outfit actresses wore at the beginning of scenes, back when he and John were both still actors. They joked about how pointless wardrobe was when viewers now had the power to fast forward past the setup. The VCR changed everything, and even that was a relic that some of the women working today didn't even know about. She had wings too. They were made of light and seemed to be the source of the brilliance that threatened to burn his eyes and split his skull. All right. Bo sat down hard, and the chair happened to be behind him where he fell by pure chance. The images flashed out of existence, but left a spread of colors in his vision that floated to and fro in the same shape of his strange little angel. "You okay, Bo?" It wasn't his ex this time either. It took him a few seconds to collect himself and identify her. He had no time to process what had just happened. Carmen. It was Carmen Stern. She was much older than Brandy, but still quite a bit younger than Bo himself. Carmen had gone by a few different names, but mostly Duchess Van Hess when he worked with her. Video clips of her were still super popular on the free sites. He decided it was safest to go with her real name since she was long retired. "Carmen." Bo tried to stand, but his legs didn't seem ready for that. She knelt beside his chair like her knees still worked as well as the old days. Don't get up. We can talk right here. He was ancient, he decided. I didn't see you when I first got here. Well, it's a big crowd. That's nice to see. I was worried no one would show up with it being on this day and with, how people are with funerals in this business. He knew exactly what she meant. His funeral wouldn't have half this many people, he feared, no matter which day it fell. Yeah, hell of a way to start the year. You guys were super close, came up together. I imagine this hit you pretty hard. Bo nodded and looked away. She placed a hand on his arm and squeezed. He felt a stirring that wasn't appropriate for this setting. You two dated at one point, right? She chuckled at that and said, who didn't date John, right? We were friendly still, but I hadn't talked with him in years. Right, I still did work with him from time to time. Behind the camera? He didn't like that she assumed enough to ask that question. No, on-screen talent still, not all the time, but I filled in when he needed me. She made a humming noise and then said, look at you, Tiger, I'm impressed. He laughed and shrugged. She had been good with her money and was doing some sort of media thing on the internet that had nothing to do with the industry. She said something, but he didn't hear a word of it as he watched a thing made of shadow walk along the opposite wall, skulking from the entrance toward John Grief's suite. It appeared to wear robes. It had wings made of feathers, but they hung limp and dark behind the figure's back. The light came from a halo this time. It was bright, but nothing like the flashes that had previously changed the nature of other colors or darkened the world entirely. No, this thing stalked through this world without looking like it really belonged to the light. The halo was yellow, but tinged with a border of bloody red. Bo started to entertain the idea that these things were more than hallucinations, but something other than the angels his mother used to pray to come protect him and deliver him from a life of sin. That thing continued up the hall and entered the viewing where Bo lost track of it. Bo, sorry, I saw a ghost. He choked on his own spit before he could come up with a response. She patted his back lightly. Sorry, that was in poor taste. No, it's fine. What were you saying? Doesn't matter. She stood up, but he caught her by the wrist, being careful not to squeeze too hard or too desperate. No, stay here. She patted his hand over her wrist with her free hand. I need to finish making the rounds. If you want, I can come get you before a few of us go out for drinks. I need some hair of the dog myself. He smiled and let go of her. That sounds good. Terrible day for a funeral. Are there many folks from our day around? I didn't see any. She frowned. My day is still going, old man. He cringed and said, ouch. I mean, it's true, but ouch. She laughed, just giving you a hard time. No, not many from back in the day. A couple you might know from the early 2000s. All of them are behind the camera now. He rolled his eyes. Yeah, come get me when you go. I'll have my walker and nurse standing by. She swatted his shoulder as a joke, but it really hurt. Stop it. He let her go, and then more dark figures approached. Bro's breath caught in his throat. These didn't even have halos. That yellow bordered by red light outlined their dark shapes. Feathers actually fell white from their ragged wings. All the ones he could make out were female. A few appeared to be unclothed, but shadow hid most all the detail. Bo pressed himself into the upholstery of his chair, hoping to go unnoticed by these passing creatures. Something grabbed his arm as they drew up even with him, and he cried out, Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. Kelly. His ex had finally arrived. He started to rise, but she held him down. No, you can stay seated. That's fine. How old did he really look? At least as old as he felt, he supposed. One of the figures turned its featureless shadow of a head in his direction. The rumbling noise that came from her could have been a growl or a purr. A feather floated free of her right wing as the group of specters continued on to where John's body lay lifeless in an open box. Everything in him told him he shouldn't, but he held out his palm as the frayed feather floated back and forth on its way down. His muscles tightened as the feather approached a landing on his hand. He thought he might have felt something, but he couldn't be sure before it broke into scattered light and disappeared entirely. Bo lowered his hand and saw Kelly kneeling beside him and staring. This wasn't good. He needed to say something. So, what did you see? Nothing. I'm just tired. Not nothing. I can feel it too. Tell me what you saw. He hesitated, wondering what she had noticed. Then he remembered she was into all that spiritualist mumbo-jumbo. He wasn't about to give her ammunition to talk about him in her next video. No way. It was nothing. How's Carl? Carl is fine. I know there are spirits here. I'm only catching glimpses from the corners of my eyes. I feel something, though. I think it is dark, but they're not revealing themselves to me, and I can't really identify the energy one way or the other. Just tell me. I don't want to be in your videos. She frowned at him. I never use names. You know that if you watched any of them. Do you watch any of my videos? That's not even the same thing, and you know it, but I take your point. Tell me what you saw. Bo sighed as he watched the last group of spirits enter the room at the end of the hall. The place was getting crowded with the living and the others. Angels, I think, sort of. What do you mean, sort of? Bo sighed. They're dark, almost like they're hidden in shadows. Made of shadows? Maybe. They have wings, either made of light or feathers. It's almost like the light around them makes them darker. Kelly stared into his dry, weary eyes with a level of concentration and sincerity that made him wildly uncomfortable. They're using the light to conceal themselves? I don't know, Kelly, maybe. I don't think those are angels. Bo rolled his eyes. It wasn't a gesture fitting his age, but it was a hard habit to break. I don't think they're real, Kelly. You're lying, but I understand why you're afraid. He couldn't meet her eyes. I don't believe in any of this stuff. What you believe doesn't change what is real, she said, as she stood up. Where did they go? Do you see them now? He turned his attention toward the viewing. She pointed. In there? I guess, maybe. Now she took his hands and pulled him to his feet. He felt too weak to stand, but it turned out he was too weak to resist. Kelly led him along the hall toward the room. John Grief on the wide screen went from dancing at somebody's wedding, not his own, to squatting down behind an old film camera with one eye closed and the other looking through the lens. It was a tight shot that hid anything else going on around that set at the time. Before they reached the doors, the figures emerged in a wash of light in front of Bo and his ex. He pulled her sideways into the wall against the flowery paper that matched the perfume stink of the place. She held his shoulder in his chest. Are they here? Just be quiet, he whispered. I don't want them to see me. Kelly ran her hands through the air around him and acted like she was plucking something away from him. It probably had to do with auras and energy. It made him want to shove her. He didn't, though, because deep down he didn't want to face this alone. In the midst of all those dark female forms with various styles of wings was a man in a suit. This was a sensible suit. The light caught the curves and lines of his face at various angles. He was waxy, swollen, and misshapen. It was definitely John Grief, though. John. Bo whispered the name, despite his fear. You see him? Kelly whispered with too much excitement for his liking. The entourage of winged women paid him no mind. John, however, lifted one thick hand, bubbled with fluid, and waved as he passed. They approached the double doors of the funeral home, and light replaced shadow. All the figures, including John, vanished, and the world slowly returned to normal in Bo's vision. The energy, Kelly said, whatever it was, it's gone now. He moved on. He crossed over, right? Did you see it? Bo glanced in her direction, but focused on the TV once more. John Grief wore the same sensible suit he'd worn in Bo's vision, and probably that he wore in his coffin. In the still image pulled from life, John accepted some sort of award. Bo couldn't tell if it was an industry award or not. Did you see it? She asked again. He pulled away from her. I didn't see anything. Dump all your crazy on your new fiancé and leave me out of it. Don't be like that. He stalked through the hall and out the doors as if he were chasing John's ghost and his new gang of dark angels. Maybe it was an old gang of angels who died too young. Bo was left to wonder what dark things might come for him once his time was up, and where would they take him. He sat down hard on the concrete steps outside. They had far less give than the chair, and his tailbone smarted. He drew in the cool, fresh air. It took 3 breaths for him to feel like his lungs had caught up on their oxygen. The sunlight drilled pain into his skull, but he took it. Bo bowed his head and decided he was going to wait on Carmen and her friends for that drink. Maybe he needed to go back inside and say goodbye to John's body, which he assumed was still there, lying waxy, swollen, misshapen, and with fluid gathering in the hands, even if the ghost had found better places to spend this new year.